Well, hello and welcome along to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn. And without further ado, I'm delighted to go to the other side of the world with my old chum down in Oz. It's the wonderful Nick Jordan. How are you doing, Nick?
I'm fine, Andrew. How are you?
Surviving extraordinary times.
It seems it, yeah.
I'll tell you what, the news cycle, it goes from focusing on one issue and then a massive explosion of that. So we have all of that on Brexit. We then have all the coronavirus. And now it's all about that interview. It raises. And I'll tell you what, extraordinary. Good old Malcolm Turnbull, he's muscling in there as well. Out he came, says, call for the Republic. It's all going to be
He doesn't miss a chance for that.
He doesn't. Malcolm. Well, he was sort of saying how easy it was for Harry to get out of the royal family, but not for Australia. So
yeah, well, you know, he's got a point. I mean, I suppose he's being a little sarcastic, but yes, he does have a point. But that's not entirely the royal family's fault with regard to Australia, I think. But anyway, yes. No, you're right. I mean, the news cycle is a sort of boom and bust feast of I've never seen anything like it. You know, as a lifelong follower of the news, as a former journalist, and all that kind of stuff, I've always paid attention to it. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with this. I've never seen anything like this. And this constant sort of feasting on the body of this item of news and onto the next and onto the next, generating higher and higher levels of outrage and division on social media. You know, I'm sure the defriending and blocking rates have shot through the roof in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, and there's so much of this stuff going on, and yeah, it is one thing or the next. I find it very hard to process actually a little bit myself. I don't think it's good for us, and we can talk about this perhaps a bit later on into the interview. But you know, we're going to be talking, I guess, about mental health, and I think this kind of the problems with social media and mental health are being well documented. I think there's a lot of understanding around that now. But I think what a lot of people miss is the problems created by the current state of the news cycle. You know, the way that news is reported, the way it's broken, the way it's covered, the way it's ditched, the way, you know, it seems to be almost a new model of journalism. You know, I haven't been a journalist for years, you know, and this wasn't the model I was taught when I was at journalist school. I'm pretty sure, you know.
What was the model you were taught? What were you taught at journalist school?
Well, it was just more traditional. I mean, for a start, when I went to journalist college, it was, I mean, print media was still the dominant form of media, you know. And I worked myself in print media. Although we were certainly doing website stuff, and you know, some of the companies I worked with were quite forward thinking. But the big print media companies, you know, the Daily Mail Group, who I'd worked for, News Corp, people like that, were mired in the print ethic and the media, and that obviously drifted over into you know, journalism tutorials, journalism class. You know, it was so you were sort of taught around print media. So you got whole different lead times, you've got whole different subscription models, whole different ways of reporting, the necessity for sub-editors, critical in print, arguably not so critical in digital, and things like this. It seems like a distant world to me now, you know. So we were taught things like the news beat, you know, how to foster contacts and this kind of stuff. It strikes me as a very different world. It wasn't as fast moving. There are many similarities, but it wasn't as fast moving. It wasn't as focused on the gotcha moment. There was a little bit more story development. It was a bit more crafted, I think. And yeah, it just seems like a very different world. I mean, from my experience working in the Daily Mail Group, what I experienced there was that the internet was just breaking at the time, you know, and some people have got wise to it, but big print media had not. And I experienced this firsthand in an albeit lowly editorial position there, was their company culture and reluctance to embrace the internet. They just didn't understand it, and they weren't willing to understand it. They'd built a very successful business model on print for however many years, you know. So it was ingrained in the culture of the company. So when this new form of publishing comes along, which is not that difficult to understand conceptually, they just didn't do anything, essentially. That's what I saw happening. They didn't do anything. They weren't necessarily hostile. They just didn't move with it, you know. And there was an assumption that they could carry on. And I think what we've seen recently with the news ban on Facebook in Australia is a sort of an outplaying of that. You know, is what we've seen is that the old media, in the form, this case of Rupert Murdoch and News Corp, have been long since been outplayed by the digital media, by fast-moving digital media geeks like Mark Zuckerberg, who could operate his company with a laptop and an internet connection from a coffee shop in Seattle or whatever, and could respond to events in his business much more quickly than these huge dinosaurs could respond. You know, so Zuckerberg could have an idea at 5:30 in the morning, and by midday it's been implemented by him and his team of geeks who are all speaking the same language. You know, moving so fast. And what we saw is that MySpace, a competitor for Facebook early on, a social media competitor owned by Rupert Murdoch, was completely outsmarted by Facebook and these people, because Murdoch and his team didn't understand how digital media works. They purchased it like a commodity, and they said, we have now bought this social media group. We will now be involved in the world of social media. It doesn't work like that. You know, it absolutely doesn't work like that. And I think what we've seen in Australia recently is that final battle between the old media and the new media, new tech, which was probably a bit of a draw this time. And, you know, it's hard to pick a good guy or a bad guy out of that. But what I do see is one form of media moving very slowly and reacting more slowly to events in a way that just isn't conceivable to the other.
Yeah. And the biggest problem is this, though, Nick, and I've spoken about this at length previously, is that what happens is, in any war, the first casualty is the truth. And I think the problem with the news cycle now is there's that rush to be first. It doesn't matter about the truth of it, doesn't matter about evidence-based journalism or anything. It's that rush to be first, and that's the problem, isn't it? And it's highlights many of the issues, including what comes out daily, if you like. And it was Denzel Washington, a number of people have said, Denzel Washington reminded us in an interview recently that if you don't read the newspapers, you're uninformed, and if you do read the newspapers, you're misinformed. And I think the reality is that is the victim, isn't it? The victim is the truth. And as a lawyer, I would always ask, and we'll come on to the interview in a moment, and the very legitimate questions that need to be addressed. The real issue is why? Who's saying what? Why are they saying it? What's the context? And drill down into that, rather than just general headlines, which will get regurgitated. Because as P.T. Barnum said, if you want to draw a crowd, start a fight. And Boyle was good at starting fights. Yeah, and that is very good folk wisdom, it's very good business wisdom as well. And I think that's what we've seen is one of the reasons the news cycle has become warped in the way it has, is because of the need for what's called clickbait. I don't know if there's a more technical term for it, but the simple need to get someone to use to click on your article and drive revenue for advertisers and that kind of stuff. And so consequently, you get headlines that are misleading. I've seen it a lot lately, you know, when I say lately, over the last 5 years, misleading headlines that don't really reflect what's there. You know, I have a number of friends who are journalists, lots of friends who are journalists, some of them recognized and successful journalists, and they always say they'll post one of their articles in the Daily Telegraph or wherever, and they'll always say, please remember, I didn't write the headline. You know, this is not my job to write the headline. So because the headline is misrepresentative, you know, and it doesn't reflect. And, you know, in the past, we would have had, the press, the media, would have had sub-editors to do this stuff. And these sub-editors are a sort of professional class of journalists, cast of journalists on their own. And they're highly skilled professional technicians who the press, we miss them, you know, they've been sort of got rid of because it's been decided that journalists can write their own headlines, or the intern can do it, or something else. And what you miss is the accuracy and the precision and the wit of a sub-editor who knows how to write a headline that isn't misleading, that falls within legal parameters, that knows how to catch the eye still, which is important, I agree. Instead, you just got the eye catcher, you know, the clickbait, the gotcha. And I think that is warping our perception of news. Because as we flick through Facebook, and I'm as guilty of this as an expert, at the news on Facebook, and I'm obsessed with the news, I'll look at a headline and make a judgment immediately, because it's so easy to do it.
Senate bill comes in, Republicans lose, Democrats, and I'll just think, oh, I'll make a snap judgment on who's to blame for that. When actually it may not be the true story at all. And, my friends are quite right to pull me up on this and say, did you actually read the article? And sometimes, no. So so social media is to blame for that, I think. But
I think you're right. Social media is extraordinary. And the other thing that happens, it's all confirming our own prejudices, isn't it? Because the way people look for the news now and look for items to support their own views. So you will read a newspaper, or you'll tune into a channel, or you'll get a circle of friends who confirm your own prejudices. So it's easy in this world. If you think this is what's happened, we're looking for something which is racist, or we're looking for something which is damaging to mental health, or we're looking at people who are disruptive to the monarchy, you want those sort of headlines and you'll search them out. And the reality is, if you look for that, you will find evidence. 99.9% of the internet is rubbish. But there is every possible view can be confirmed by somebody else. And what we always encourage people to do is get your news from lots of different sources, because that way it will be balanced. And I think that's when you have to question everything.
You do, and I think that's very true. I mean, one way is, yes, certainly get your news from lots of different sources. I mean, part of the problem today is that a lot of fake news outlets are very professional looking. If you look at some, I won't name it, but they look as professional as the next thing. As the big corporates. But then you think, well, are the big corporates telling me the truth as well? Because some of that stuff seems a bit like propaganda as well. And I think that it becomes increasingly difficult for, your normally intelligent person to discern what's going on here, actually. I mean, I've read stuff in CNN recently, which, we all correctly point a finger at Fox News for peddling propaganda. And they do sometimes, not always. But I should read some of CNN's coverage of Joe Biden. I don't want to get too political here, but but it's problematic. And I think, yes, you're right. Get your news from a variety of sources, but really beware of where they're coming from. But also, I also think you can. I mean, part of the structure of journalism, and this still applies, I notice, thank God, in news articles, is when you report a news article, there's a structure that you should do it in: who, what, why, where, when. So these things should fit into the opening sentence or two of your news report. So that if the passing busy commuter needs to find the news at that moment from a newspaper, all he has to do is read the first sentence, and there it is. Princess Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris last night, along with her partner Dodi Al-Fayed. Okay, bit of a grim example, but who, what, why, where, when is all in that statement. And everything that follows afterwards is detail, it's extraneous, it's colour. The news is Princess Diana was killed. That's the news. And you still can find that in news articles. Journalists still are obviously doing that, because I instinctively look for it every time. And I think if you're able to sort of grasp that and then look at news articles that aren't doing that for some reason, that put an opinion at the top, for instance, or detail at the top. So, there were 40,000 people at President Trump's speech. He gave a fantastic, that's not the news. I don't care how many people were there. What did he say? What impact did it have afterwards? That's the news. That's the story, And I think if you can keep, as a consumer, if you can keep hold of the story and what it is in your own mind, you've got more of a chance of fighting your way through the sort of information overload that you've talked about, But it's increasingly complicated, as we all know. I mean, there's far more information available to the human mind than there was, 10 years ago. I mean, it's vast. It's an information overload. Yeah. And information is different from knowledge, or wisdom.
Oh no, and we aren't drowning. We're drowning in a sea of information, and most of it which is false. And so this whole thing of fake news, it's unnecessary. It's just cacophony. That's what we have, isn't it? And the trouble is how the general consumer, how the general person on the street is supposed to decipher what is true and what's not is tricky, isn't it?
It's very tricky, and I think what people do, understandably, because I do it myself, and is they retreat into opinion, and I get that, it's fine. It's fine, not fine, because opinion is the sort of abandonment of knowledge. Everyone says, well, I'm entitled to my opinion. You absolutely are, but there's also such things as a poorly informed opinion, for instance, or an opinion that isn't worthwhile, or an opinion that can be easily questioned, which people don't seem to like so much. So I think, you know, there's a retreat into opinion. That's what's happening, is people sort of feel they're overloaded. They don't really know who to believe anymore, understandably. New tech seems as bad as Rupert Murdoch, seems as bad as this, that, and the other. The Epoch Times looks the same as CNN, but I don't trust either of them. And so they retreat into an opinion. Well, I like Donald Trump, or I thought Joe Biden was great, or whatever. And it's not backed up by reason.
It's evidence-based journalism, and if you look, and this you talk about social media, and actually it's a curse as well as a blessing. And just because people have the mechanisms for communication I think the more technology we have to communicate, the less we're able to communicate. And I think what happens is it's all about extreme. Everybody's suddenly become an expert, haven't they, Nick? Because you turn on, everybody was an expert on constitutional matters when we're discussing Brexit. Everybody became a virologist as to how to tackle the coronavirus. Everybody is now an expert on race and looking for offence and so on and so forth. And everybody says, look, if you rubbish mental health and those sort of important works there, all of that, for me, sadly, when it's just noise and it's not rational debate, it diminishes what has actually been some great progress in some real issues.
Yeah, that has. I mean, you know, the progress of knowledge continues. You know, the progress of wisdom, the progress of expertise. These things continue. We've seen it in the development of the vaccine. You know, is that? I mean, if you put aside conspiracy theories, this vaccine was. It's a masterpiece of medical engineering. You know, and the reason it didn't take so long is because people finally got together and decided to abandon the paperwork and the bureaucracy around it, because there was a crisis at hand. But the thing itself, the vaccine itself, is, I mean, this is some of the smart, you know, literally the most intelligent people in the world who are working on this stuff, as they are working on the, you know, various cures, to use the broad word, around HIV and malaria and that kind of stuff. These are the smartest guys in the room, you know, and given full reign, this is what they can do, you know. So expertise is out there, and it's, for me, one of the great tragedies of the last, well, I don't want to pin it at anybody's door, but say the last 10 years, I don't know, is the demise in standing of expertise. So, you know, when you hear someone who is deeply knowledgeable about a thing talk, now, you don't have to agree with them, but I would challenge you to come up with a reasoning that is as clear as theirs, as good as theirs. That's all.
Oh, no, I have to agree with you. I mean, when we had over here, and I'm fascinated with seeing media around the world and how things are covered, but we would always have the sound bites from the politicians when you're talking about, they would come on all these different chat shows and so on and so forth, and they'd all have their sound bites about it.
Yeah.
For me, the most impressive people, and actually one of the most impressive, was Professor Sarah Gilbert, who was an expert on this. She talked about she worked on the Oxford Biomedical vaccine and so on and so forth, and she would explain in a scientific way what it all meant. So it wasn't about sound bites. It wasn't about a government position. It wasn't political.
No.
It was, as far as I could understand, she was and is an expert in the field and can explain it in very clear terms. For me, you're right. Those are the experts, and those are the people that we can listen to and should listen to make sure that we can get an informed decision.
That's right, and they are out there, you know, and they are out there. I mean, there was an example this last week of the I don't know if you caught it, but it made certain headlines in certain quarters, and that was the position of Lord Jonathan Sumption about the lockdown. You know, he's an opponent of the lockdown. He's one of Britain's leading jurists and philosophers. He's led an incredibly stellar career in the law and philosophy. Now, you don't have to agree with Jonathan Sumption's. His broad contention is that the lockdown has infringed civil liberties to such an extent that it's now become worse than the pandemic itself. And now you can disagree with that, fine. But, you know, when I'd heard him talk, he presented over the course of 50 minutes, so it takes a little bit of attention to watching through to the end. You know, even I struggled. I was like, you know, has he finished yet? But he presented a pretty unassailable moral and legal argument for his case, you know, a position for his case. Now, disagree with him by all means, but disagree at the same level. You know, don't just dismiss him because his hair was a bit messy and he's a bit of an eccentric or whatever. This is some of the stuff I was reading on Twitter, that it was an outrage, Jonathan Sumption, to say these things, because he's clearly crazy, or he's ad hominem attacks and things like that. I think, well, you know, there is another position to be taken, but please, can we not? And for me, it was just a great relief. I didn't agree with everything he said, but for me, it was a great relief to hear someone talk like that.
Yeah.
It was like the world.
Again, you're right on that, Nick. And it's human nature, isn't it? When people can't argue in a logical way, what they do, they resort to personal attacks. And
Yes.
they drag in anything, how you look, how you talk, if you've been honest about mental health issues in the past, and we'll come on to this, because I know you've been subject to that sort of stuff. Your opinion, they try to devaluate your opinion, devalue your opinion by devaluing you as a person.
That's right, and exactly it. And also they sort of, something else I've noticed is the rise of the straw man in the world. So where you know, a straw man being where you say that someone has presented such and such an argument, and then you proceed to knock it down. Well, they haven't presented that argument in the first place. So you're knocking down the falsehood, and you're accusing them falsely. And that was happening to Sumption. You know, I mean, this is a man whose mind is particularly well refined, I would say, who would not present logical fallacies like straw men. He just wouldn't do it. You know, he couldn't possibly. There were no straw men in his argument. And yet, what you found was people on Twitter saying, well, Sumption said that the life of a old person is not as valuable as the life of a young person. He didn't say that at all. What he said is that it is less valuable because there is less time within which it can be lived. And if you want to look at this rationally, that's what we're talking about. And he said, you know, I'm an older person too, and I don't want to think that my life is of any less value than anyone else's. It isn't. But if we're going to look at this thing rationally and apply reason, then that's what's happening. And, you know, for this simple statement of rational understanding, he's pilloried as a crazy haired old loony who's, you know, this kind of stuff. And I think just listen to the guy, you know, engage with him.
Yeah, and you hear that all the time, because people, they don't go to it when you have all these reports and you ask people questions. And I've heard politicians on this as well. You have an enormous 555-page report, and your first question would be, have you read the report? And the answer, I didn't have time. So what they then get all of the headlines, which is somebody's interpretation of what would have been said.
Yeah.
So briefly, 50-minute talk it was. What were Sumption's points?
Well, Sumption's main points were that is that excuse me, there's a noisy motorbike just going by. Sumption's main point was that the lockdown has become such a mess and so severe that it is now infringing on British life at present, and will do particularly in the future, to such an extent that it's become worse than the pandemic, worse than the risks that we associate with the pandemic. And he said it is perfectly understandable that people would want to implement some kind of social restriction policy in order to protect others from a communicable disease. You know, fine. But he said, looking at the statistics involved, that the vast majority of people, I mean, it really is 99% something of people who have died from this are very elderly. Now, this is where it gets a bit touchy, you know, because no one is suggesting that their lives are disposable. No one is suggesting that. But that is nonetheless a fact that you should bring into a kind of a risk reduction strategy for the nation. You know, who is it killing? This terrible disease, who is it killing? Is it killing the young? Is it killing, you know, women between the age of 25 and 33? Who is it? No, it's killing people over the age of 85. Now, they're just as much value, you know, our elders and they're just as much value to society as anyone. But this is a thing you need to factor into the risk assessment, he was saying. And further to this, he said, you know, in the past, when there was some kind of Black Death style pandemic, the sick were locked up, you know, understandably, because they were clearly communicable, transmissible, you know. He said, what we're seeing here is the healthy populace locked away. And he said, that is an unusual step. You know, the protracted locking away of the healthy populace of an industrialized nation, he said, is really unusual. And in order to achieve that, the government has had to break any number of legal conventions. Well, as you know, as a lawyer, I say legal conventions, they're conventions, so they're breakable, you know, but we operate like convention. And Sumption's point is that we break these conventions. They're precious and they're irreplaceable to some extent. And once they're broken, they may be very difficult to replace because no one's paying attention to that. And he said that overall, in his view, presented a greater threat to British society than the pandemic itself. And he said particularly in the effects it's going to have in the future, such as the lost educations of a generation of kids, the job opportunities, the normal opportunities you associate with a capitalist democratic society have been abandoned for quite a lengthy period now. And he said that is an unprecedented experiment in social life. And he said, I think it is, to conclude his general point, he said, I think it is reasonable for people to start to resist that. And being very English and very much an eminent jurist, he said he talked of civil disobedience, but he didn't suggest for a minute people go out in the streets and even poll tax levels and start rioting. He suggested that we simply start to ignore these laws. We simply ignore them. And not in a grotesque or irresponsible way, but that we go and have a drink with your friend. Go and, go and have a meal with your mates, and have the dinner party for 6 people, or 9 people, or whatever. And he said because these are the things in life that make it worth living. It's a really important thing, a principle, I think, something I learned as a young journalist as well. There are things in life that make it worth living, and those things are not high policy of government, philosophy, logic, the royal family. It's nothing. It's the simple, everyday communications that we have with our family. These things are our birthright, and our ancestral birthright. And once they're removed, the whole fabric of society starts to look a little bit unstable. I'm not saying society is going to collapse and need of assumption, but I think he said, there are things in life that make it worth living, and we have a right to some extent. And he said, my proposal is that British people should and will start simply ignoring these excessive lockdown laws and claim it back quietly like that.
I think, the interesting point on that, Nick, is, as you say, it's looking at his argument, and you need to get experts who qualify that. Are there damn lies and statistics? Is it right that it's only the certain population?
Sure.
Then becomes a moral question, as you say, and
Yep.
this is why if you're looking for the journalistic headline, slaughter all the sick, get rid in a
let the elderly die,
put out the infirms, bring out your dead because it doesn't matter. You work on that sort of principle. That's your headline, but as it's always a balancing act, isn't it? The decision makers need to say the health of the nation is equally important and inextricably linked to the wealth of the nation. And by wealth and health, it also is not just the financial ability to do things, but also the damage, not just on education, but also mental health as well.
Absolutely.
It's gone through the roof for the reasons that you mentioned.
It has. And I would just to sort of finalise that, I suppose, and pick up on your final point. I do understand that a friend of mine who's been in the military said, you don't understand because the government are in a very difficult position. They have to make judgment calls that are difficult, that it's tough. So they are trying to balance health and liberty and that kind of stuff. Fair enough. And I know they're in a difficult position, partially of their own making, but what I see and what Sumption was seeing is a lack of foresight on the part of the government and a certain dishonesty as well, which seems to be being increasingly apparent to the public. And I think they've made the situation worse by a mixture of incompetence and kind of confusion. But I think it's a tricky. The path they're headed down is a tricky one. And that's another thing I learned at journalist school is that a power once removed is a power difficult to restore. And I was always taught that the moment the police, for instance, start asking for extra powers, which they do all the time, your journalistic feelers should start twitching. What is going on here? What are they really after? Maybe they're after something honest, but how is that going to impact personal liberty down the line? Is it going to mean what for me and my friends? Because we're the ones affected by the law, on a street level like that. And so when a power is ever removed or restrictions are placed in society, I think we all have a little duty to sort of say, just follow that through. Where's that going to lead up? You can say full well that these are emergency powers granted during an emergency, as they were, for instance, during the Second World War, many of which were then restored after the war. Fine. But I can give you innumerable examples of powers removed that were never restored, And so it's up to the press, the fourth estate, to hold the government to account properly about this. I don't say the government are always wrong about this. They've got some things right, but it's up to the press, whoever is in power, for them to hold them to account and ask serious questions, I think, of how this is going to work in the future for the British people.
And you're right, it is those serious questions and the right questions, because Sumption has made a few assumptions, some of which we need to look at. So is it right that it's mainly over 85s who get it?
Sure.
Different reports. Is it right that people are dying with as opposed to from? To look at those sort of statistics. If you communicate that in a very clear way to the public, then they might have a better understanding of why certain measures are in place. You can say, are we effectively going to sacrifice the older people for the benefit of the whole of society? And that's that moral question about what lives are more important. Is a certain life? And is that old question they always ask about the sinking ship? It's got 5 people on it, the whole ship will sink if you don't get rid of one person. They always put, like, there's a child and there's a pregnant woman and there's an old man and there's this. Who do you throw overboard? That's the question. And the honest answer from a moral point of view is they should draw lots, because they're all equally important, and they're all equally important.
I think I think
you need to put that clearly, and then I think this is the biggest problem. And when I look at talking to people around the world, Jacinda from New Zealand, your neighbour, always used to be the one who used to shine as a spotlight, because there she was, cool as a cucumber. I know there's been a few issues since, but cool as a cucumber during an earthquake, making her public statement, and the public loved her and all got behind her, and she was very good, very clear communicator. But you look at some places around the world and they think, well, hang about, you're messing it up, so we don't trust the politicians. And I think if you can communicate and you can base it on evidence and explain to people in a clear and rational way, then they can make those informed decisions.
Yeah, that's right, and that's exactly what I would say as well. And I think people have, for instance, mistaken Boris Johnson as a great communicator. He is in some ways, on a populist gut level. He is. People, well, obviously not everybody, but lots of people do like him. And there's a sort of there's a charming manner to his delivery that some people engage with. But I think that he, at a time of crisis, his crisis management, his crisis delivery, if you like, isn't as clear as it needs to be. Now, for me, I don't hate Boris Johnson, but he's come across in a way that it sort of strikes me as a little problematic. When you compare it to someone like Jacinda Ardern, you can talk all you want that she's got a smaller problem on her hands, that New Zealand is an easier country to manage, blah blah blah. But none of that's got to do with her, with the clarity of her communication. She's very good at that. And that is vital. That's not just a PR spin. That is the message you are sending to your nation as a message of reassurance, of salvation, of hope for the future, of all these sorts of things. And I think Boris isn't that kind of person. And he's not. He's never claimed to be Winston Churchill. That's a big myth. But that Churchill's belligerent, incisive, and eloquent delivery, Johnson doesn't have that. He's a brilliant writer, actually, as a journalist. If you read his Telegraph stuff, in the Spectator,
and Spectator and all that sort of thing. I mean, absolutely, whole fantastic background as a journalist.
Yeah, but in a crisis management sense, when he sort of ruffles his hair and says, "Well, I mean, I know it's heartfelt, and I don't believe he's. I do believe he's trying, but it's kind of, it just doesn't come across great, and and that is to be regretted."
Well, I think, and what's been interesting, Nick, is, as I say, comparing the way that different nations have responded. Boris was actually very absent for a lot of the early stages. He likes to come out when there's good news, and when you look at the polls now, popularity is climbing.
Yeah, of course.
We're doing fantastically well with the rollout of the vaccine and so on and so forth. But during the big bad days, it was other ministers who were put forward to effectively.
He did. It was a bit of lions and donkeys going on there, where he'd shove these hapless, pasty-faced ministers in front of the guns and let them deal with it. I mean, I think he's he's a good news politician. He's a populist, undoubtedly. He's a good news politician. He doesn't want to be
popular. You don't want to go and give people bad news.
No, of course not. And I get that, but that reveals what this has done is cruelly revealed his limitations as a politician. Again, that's to be regretted for his career and him, and who knows what will happen next. But okay, no one could have seen this coming. It was a curveball. But another another example of good leadership
some
is to
people
be
could
able
see
to.
it coming. You have all sorts of people like Bill Gates, who he was predicting, and history repeats itself. We had Spanish flu in 1918. We had all those.
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, also how you deal with the unexpected is a measure of your leadership as well. You know, if something truly is unexpected, then, as this might well not have been, as you say, but then, you know, how do you deal with that? And it's, you know, it's a real shame. And I look at Britain from my sort of vantage point in Australia, where we didn't have it anywhere near as bad, and nothing like the sort of restrictions. And I look at Britain and my heart bleeds. You know, I love Britain, obviously. And you know, I was chatting to a friend just the other day, and he said, you know, we can't even sit on a park bench. You know, I can't even go out for a park bench. And he wasn't being critical of the government or China or the pandemic. He just was a despair at the end of his tether. You know, this has been going on for months. My kid can't get back to university. Business is suffering. I can't sit on a park bench, have a coffee, you know, and I hadn't realised quite how demoralising that must be, you know. I mean, we had it for a couple of months.
It's a human nature. I mean, the restrictions are now easing, people are getting back to school and so on and so forth.
Thank God, yeah.
Meet people and so on and so forth. So the restrictions are being lifted. But you're right, at certain stages, a lot of the fundamental human things that we need to be human, like having a hug occasionally, you know, down and just chatting to somebody casually and
hugging your mum.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, all those things.
Well, that's something back to Jonathan's assumption point. These are the things that make life worth living. You know, it's not Facebook. It's not all the things we associate with entertainment. It's these fundamental human needs that are, as I say, our birthright.
Although you say something, a lot of people would argue, and they've argued this in various forums, is that basically it is a human right to be able to have social media. And people feel left out if they don't have it. This is what you will turn around, and the way that social media, they hook you in. It's those you never want to miss out. You always want to hunt for the next like. You want to hunt for the opinions, because the more likes you get, the more popular you are. It's about value of you as a person. And down to the little dots, which are the little circulating dots.
Yes.
Say,
turn them off. Turn the dots off.
Don't turn over.
Turn the dots off. Yeah.
No,
but that's something I've implemented as a heavy social media user and addict. I found that I was just social media overload, and one of the things I took from that recent documentary, The Social Dilemma, about Facebook and everything, some of it I thought was a little overwrought, a little bit too doomsday-ish. But one of the things I took from it was a simple piece of advice to make things better for yourself: turn your notifications off, so that you don't get the red dot of death on every app that you got, every single app you've got, whether it's your weight loss app or your meditation app, wherever it is, Facebook. They want to send you notifications always. As part of the setup process, it will send you a little message. Do you want to allow them? Let's say no. So that, because that is the thing that's compelling you to go back and back again for those little serotonin hits that are causing you to be addicted to your phone, you know. And I think is phone addiction a terrible thing? Well, not in the same way that heroin addiction is, for instance, but it is still affecting our lives in a negative sense. And I think that's, for me, the definitive understanding of addiction. What is an addiction? Is a repeated pattern of behavior that you can't seem to stop, that is having a detrimental effect on your life. And that's the really important thing. So you can say, well, I'm a fitness addict. Well, okay, yeah, I get that. And then maybe a physical reason why you need that hit. But is it having a really detrimental effect on your life? Is it affecting your finances? Is it affecting your close relationships? Is it compromising your values as a person? Probably not, you know? Obviously, with substance misuse, you can see that all those things do apply. With social, you know, phone and social media use, well, is it having a negative effect on your life? And I think to some extent, it can do, yeah, quite obviously. For me, for instance, in my own personal usage, which is heavy usage, I'm obsessed with the news, I'm obsessed with communication and all this kind of stuff, I've found my mental health gets really quite stressed out sometimes by the constant notifications, which I've turned off now. But and I do view it less consequently. I deleted some apps and things like that. But I find the arguing and the constant need to take a position, the binary nature of the argumentation, the sort of non-rational, the emotional stuff, that will take a toll on your mental health as sure as anything. And that is bad for you, you know. And you are getting these wonderful little interfaces that I'm looking at now that's so beautifully designed by extremely clever people. They know exactly what they're doing. And one of the things they're doing is bringing you back again and again and again to the screen. You know, that's in their remit. So the psychologists, the you know, the visual specialists, the color specialists, all these people who are employed by companies like Apple and Sony to make their phones, they're working to a commercial brief. You know, they're not supplying you with objective clinical information in the way a doctor might. They're capable of that, but instead they're being paid a lot of money by Apple to draw you back into a process, you know? So the psychologist you see down the road would say, don't fall for that, because these are psychological tricks designed to get you engaged with your mobile phone and thus engaged with advertising and all sorts. The psychologist employed by Facebook and Apple is of a completely different type. You know, their brief is to sell you a commercial product, and our sort of mental stability and mental health is in the hands of these corporations right now, I think, more than it is objective medical services or voices of reason, you know. And I think that,
again, you're absolutely right on that. And it's the realization, this is why I say people can make informed decisions. If you realize that the reason we're being given all this access to various other things and all these softwares and fun things to play with is we're paying, but we're paying with our attention. And the idea then is that people are getting commercial benefit from being paid with our attention. And in the same way is data is the new currency. The more we share about ourselves, the more we share about our lives, the easier it is for people to be able to sell to us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And we've all done it willingly. I mean, you know, I still do it probably now. My data shadow must be the size of the, you know, the Eiffel Tower. I mean, it's we all do it, you know, mindlessly put information about ourselves, you know. And up to a point, you know, as someone who's worked in marketing, I can understand the marketing need for that kind of information, you know. But we do have to come to a point where we look at it and say, how far is this going? And are we really willing to be this, you know, subject to this kind of commercial model, which it is intrusive and it is worrying. You know, I'm not a big enemy of big tech or anything like that, and I don't ascribe to the many of the ills that some people do. But you know, I've got a pro-business position where I see a business using the skills and intelligence it has to maximise its growth and profit. You know, and for me, that's reasonable. Yeah. Up to the point where it becomes not reasonable. You know, and I think, you know, a lot of people, for instance, cheered on the old media in their recent battle with Facebook in Australia because they saw it as a break on big tech. Now, that one reason alone, it's a little bit romantic, because old media are just as ruthless and just as willing to manipulate your mind as new media. You know, just new media have found a better way to do it. And that's it. And the old media are a bit jealous of that and out of pocket.
But also just on that point, and the whole thing about Facebook and being banned, and you have to pay to get the headlines. It's a commercial decision as well. You have to turn around, and when they say, right, we're going to switch everybody off, which is what they did. It's a commercial battle. It's not about right or wrong and other things.
No.
At the end of the day, these are businesses. It's not charity. These are businesses, and businesses need to make money. And the way that you make money is that more people engage, the more people who use your products or services, the better it's going to be to generate.
Same as it ever was. You know, if you'd opened a store in the high street 150 years ago, the success or failure of your business is dependent on how many people you can get through the door and sales you can make to that person, you know. And this is exactly what we're seeing now. You know, a sort of a different multicolored version, but it's the same thing. And a business, you know, apart from having legal duties to its shareholders or what have you, its sole purpose is to make a profit, you know. And that's Facebook was just protecting itself. There was no moral argument to be had from either side. You know, so the old media came up with notions of democracy and liberty, and new media came up with notions of freedom of expression and freedom from the old media. Nonsense. It's a big old turf war about money and advertising revenue.
But just be honest about that, because then people can make an informed decision. So it's not about the right song. We know that we'd rather have Facebook showing our headlines and so on and so forth, but there's a cost to that, because we've had to employ journalists, we have to do this and so on and so forth. So share some of the love. If you're generating revenue, pay us right.
And I think I think that's what's happening. And you're right. On the flip side, you know, I think it has become slightly objectionable for the Australian government to sort of start to implement legislation that suits one particular business operation or group of business operations, you know. And anyway, that's kind of internal Australian politics. But I you know, look, I'm glad it's been resolved. There's obviously a bit of compromise to be found, as there always would be, you know. What I did find, though, in my own experience, just speaking about the news cycle and effect on your mental health, is in the, I don't know how it was, like 10 days in which the news was turned off in Australia. And I don't know if people didn't experience it, but what that meant was all news from all sources everywhere. So it wasn't just Australian news. I couldn't get CNN. Friends who used to routinely post news from, I don't know, Papua New Guinea, just disappeared. Right. You know, all my English news, the Cambridge Evening newspaper, which I, you know, still read, is gone. So everything news related was off Facebook. And what you're left with is people's posts. You know, some of them vacuous, some of them funny, some of that, but it was just people's posts in the way that Facebook used to be. I've been using it for long enough to remember it was just people writing funny stuff about their lives.
And
it wasn't always interesting.
There used to be lots of kittens rolling over and doing.
Yeah, well, the return of the cats was a big thing. Yeah, the cats returned to Facebook, and for me, I found myself using it less because I engage with the politics and the news. So I found myself using it less, which is good. I found myself less stressed, and honestly, someone got in touch with me after 4 days and said, someone in Britain, are you okay, Nick? Because whenever I go quiet on social media, people worry that I've, you know, having some sort of problem. And I said, no, I'm fine. It's just like, you know, there was no reason for me to engage so much with Facebook anymore, you know. And it was actually quite a blessed relief. So I'm not writing posts, getting het up about what this politician said, or, you know, and I wasn't constantly subject to a diet of news. I think one of the good things that may come out of this is Facebook are looking, as a general model, at reducing the amount of news that flows through the site anyway. So they're reducing news coverage in other countries as well, not banning it, but reducing it, like Indonesia and some others, because they've said we don't think it's so good for our users. You know, now we were just talking about commercial decisions. I mean, that sounds like a moral decision to me, but I would imagine there needs to be a commercial underpinning to it somewhere. But they're deciding that, you know, maybe we should have less news, and I agree with that. I think it's you know, I found Facebook is my sole. That's my first stopping point for getting the news.
Right.
So when I wasn't getting it, I suddenly forgot where to get it from. I simply type CNN.com or FoxNews.com. That's where it is. It's still there. But I disengaged with the news a little. And I found it quite an interesting digital detox, you know.
And I think that's what people do need, because when you're looking at mental health issues, it is that digital detox. It's that realization. If people can stop and realize, actually, it is an addiction, and there are all sorts of addictions, and some have more serious consequences, but social media and the need to always be on, always connected, always waiting so you don't miss out. That sort of thing, which is understanding how you got to that position, and understanding that there's a commercial reason that you're there. You get the greatest minds who can make sure that you're hooked on this social media for the next message. If you realize that, it then becomes a choice. You can then turn around and say, okay, it used to be jokingly referred to as a crackberry. You remember when people used to sleep with their blackberries under their pillows? That's what you do.
Yeah, that's right.
But you're working on that sort of basis. But also what happens is social media, it attracts sometimes the lowest of the low. Is the trolls who hide behind anonymity. And people will turn around and they have the most repulsive views. And it's going back to what I said beforehand. And they'll have a pop at you because your views don't correspond with their views. They don't want an argument, a logical argument. They just want to have a pop.
Yeah, they want to have a fight. And Twitter is particularly bad for that. I mean, at least on Facebook, you get a little bit of space to, if you choose to sort of develop your views, I suppose. You can write as many words as you like, essentially. Whereas I think this ostensibly brilliant idea that Twitter had, their founding concept, I suppose, of 140 characters, there is a brilliance to that. I can see I mean, I don't need to tell you the appeal of it, because, you know, the company's, you know, it's the big. Is it the biggest social media company in the world? I think it probably is, you know. But that simple concept.
Well, now they've lost their poster boy. Well, they lost their poster boy with 80+ million.
Well, that's gonna, you know, cutting off your nose to spite your face, I think. I mean, he was the master of it, you know. I mean, you can say what you want. I mean, I'm a diehard fans of Trump, friends of mine, have said, I do wish he'd stop with the Twitter, you know, but removing him was a mistake, I think, but personally. But yeah, but look, that 140 words, it's turned out to be very toxic. It's a brilliant idea, but it's not, I think, not worked in the way it should have. And what it's allowed people to do is not debate with meaningful brevity, but instead to just throw. It's difficult to communicate in brevity. You know, right. It's difficult to get your point across.
Characters, not words. Yes, I'm a limitation on characters, and limitations on characters being the appropriate thing. Yes. But you're right. But what it should do is stop people and make them think, because some people, they have verbal diarrhea and they just keep on going and going and going.
Yeah.
You want to write a speech like an hour speech takes 2 hours. Write a 15-minute speech takes 4 because you're editing it down to the pertinent points. The reality is that, and this is the bit I object to, is the anonymity of people using the social media to basically throw the most incendiary things, looking for that debate moment, cause debate, cause division, and everything else. And when you start within that, where everybody's got an opinion, it's always on mental health. It's always the most extreme that people focus in on. You can have 99 fantastic, we love you, Nick, we love you, you're fantastic, and one person who will bring in, as they did, your mental health issues, which you've been so open about, and use that against you. Yeah, that's the thing to drill down on, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is, and I think that's one of the things, you know, with Twitter, and is there was a thing that was leveled at the press years ago, the fourth estate, the old press, the old media, the printing press, was that they wielded power without responsibility. That was the phrase, power without responsibility, and that was true up to a point. And you know, so Lord Beaver, I think it was in the era of Lord Beaverbrook, that kind of Beaverbrook's journalists could say anything they wanted and not have to be accountable then for the effects that those things had in society. Now, that is true up to a large extent, because Beaverbrook was just trying to sell newspapers. So he has power without responsibility to wider society. Now, wow, is that writ large times a million when it comes to Twitter? Because, you know, journalists at least should have at least a professional understanding of things like libel, of the importance to not say something about another person that you don't know is true. You know, you can't lie about it. If you can't prove that it's true, you can't say it, you know. And that principle is long since abandoned on social media, where people just say the worst possible things about someone else without recourse to evidence. And I think that, you know, new media press, if you go to CNN.com, they will still, and Fox News, you won't find them libeling people. They're aware of their responsibilities. They don't want, it costs them a lot of money for a start, but also they're aware of the cultural responsibility, you know. But also on Twitter, no one understands this, you know. Some people get into legal trouble for it, you know. They do. I mean, I help run a Facebook group for prisoners in Australia, people who've, you know, vulnerable people who've been affected by imprisonment. And one of the first things we put up was a plea to people to comment freely, by all means, and, you know, strong opinions are welcome, but don't libel someone else. And I explained it. I said, a libel is where you say something about someone else that essentially isn't true, where you can't prove it's true. And I said, it will get you into trouble. This has been happening to Facebook groups and pages all over. The administrators of the group are being sued. People who comment below the line or put a like on the libelous comment are being sued. And in some ways, I think, well, it's a shame that's happening, but also maybe that's a good thing, you know, because once in my career as a journalist, I was threatened with libel action. I said something about someone that I couldn't prove was true, you know, and they lawyered up and they wrote us some harsh letters, and you know, we had to defend ourselves and publish an apology. Now, I didn't get done for libel, but I was mortified. You know, I blundered into it as a rookie, really, with a mixture of bad grammar and foolish intent, I suppose. Not malicious, but foolish. And they were right, you know, but I was mortified by that. And, you know, and I remember my lawyer saying to me, he said, well, it's like, you're not a real journalist until you've been done for libel. But I think, you know, that in a professional context, it's one of the worst things you can do, right? And yet people on Twitter are sort of contributing to the flow of information. It's not journalism, but the flow of information in a way that can have a serious impact on the life of the person that's being defamed, you know. I mean, if there was a big Twitter mob tomorrow to establish that a certain celebrity in British life was a paedophile, who's accountable for that? You know, when The Sun accused Elton John of such a thing, he quite rightly sued them to within an inch of their life. He negotiated a front page apology, which is highly unusual. And The Sun was seen publicly they totally retracted everything because they had no evidence really. Where is that kind of accountability on Twitter? You know, but you can get a whole Twitter mob up in a heartbeat and say something like that about an innocent person. You know, we hear it about Joe Biden, we hear it about Donald Trump, we hear it about all sorts of people. These people don't have convictions for any of this stuff, you know, and because they're significant politicians, they tend not to sue, right? But turn that against someone else, and I think you've got a serious force for harm in social life. And I don't see where the accountability lies.
Yeah, it is that balance, isn't it, between being able to tell the truth and everybody says I must freedom of speech. Well, freedom of speech has consequences. Absolutely, people should air their opinion, but you have to stay within the law because it always is. Tell a lie often enough and it becomes the truth. And so often people, and they don't think. Most people are regurgitators. And some of the worst things are when you send round little jokes and it sounds like a joke, but within it, there's a message, there's a political message, or there's or whatever. And people just regurgitate because they think it's funny. But the reality is it's propaganda. And so often this propaganda is defamatory. And the defamation is if it's true. But most people don't even think about whether it's true or not. They just go back to, I want some more likes, and people are going to watch my Twitter feed, or we're going to share this particular post because it's funny. And it's not funny. It's very damaging, and it's
really damaging.
It's defamatory, and there should be consequences.
But there is, and people say, oh well, you know, I mean, for instance, supporters of Donald Trump would say that the last 4 years he's spent with this man being ridiculed and held up to general scorn by the majority of the media. Yeah, they're right. That sort of has happened. I see their point. So now it's their turn. Now that Joe Biden is in, they're going to spend the next 4 years doing the same to Biden, regardless of whether it's true or not. Now, you know, you can criticize all these politicians on all sorts of valid grounds, but really, is it that productive to now say, well, we are now going to spend the next 4 years picking holes in Joe Biden's policies and regurgitating false stories and whatever, because it makes us feel better about the previous 4 years? Well, I mean, where does it stop? You know, where do we take a little rain check on this and say, can we now establish a point where we can all start to tell the truth again and not be accountable to our Twitter feed and the lighting up of the board, and say, you know, is this actually true or not? You know, I think fact checking in the media tried to do that at first, but it's become a politicized thing itself, you know. And who's checking the fact checkers? And the fact checkers have been seen to get it wrong on a number of occasions or be politically biased.
And you can make sure you distinguish between basically an opinion and something which is stated as a fact. And I think that's so important to the point you made beforehand, is that tell the story. This is your headline. This happened here. This is what happened, and so on and so forth. And now here's our opinion on it. It's very different to turning around the opinion saying, this was terrible. This is what happened. And I think the reality, Jimmy Wales, he tried to establish this wiki extension, if you like, where he would check the evidence-based journalists, and you get a panel of experts who will then check every story. And I think that's great. The trouble is it's resources between everything, because if you state something as a fact, you have to have evidence to back it up. And as I made the point earlier, you can find evidence for anything, but you have to work out, is that evidence in itself justifiable? So when you're looking at the truth behind anything, which is my passion, if you like, is that the truth about this is dig down, question people, look in the same way with assumption things, don't make assumption about assumptions. What he said was this is his reason for saying it. Is that right? Then
is that right?
Have a look at it. Don't proper debate.
Don't worry that what his hair looked like, or that he's a member of the establishment and therefore a Tory or whatever.
It's a cheap shot.
Just forget all that.
It's a cheap shot to get away and throwing personal insults in order to devalue them as a witness.
So he went to Oxford and he's white and he's 72 years old. Well, okay, but none of that for me impacts the truth or otherwise of the things he's saying. And I think you're right. Take a single line out of it. You know, if we're interested in sound bites, break it down then. Break a complicated argument down or situation and that's how you deal with it. Take a single line and say, is that correct? You know, think about it. And I think
that's the thing where I'm dominating the news at the moment, and looking at that side, and the Oprah interview with Harry and Meghan, and so on and so forth. There are some really, really serious issues raised, and we talked about mental health, and it's been a big thing that you and I have spoken about on this program beforehand. The biggest problem I have with it is drilling down. When you make a general statement, statement like, this is what happened, there's racism, but I'm not going to say when, how, context, and those sort of things. There are so many questions that it begs that you have to work out, is it fair to make the general statement without drilling down? What do you think?
Yeah, and you're referring to, so for instance, Meghan Markle's answers to the, I mean, you're referring to the questions posed by Oprah Winfrey. Well, I mean, that's a problem in itself. I mean, my first question about Oprah Winfrey is this journalism at all? Well, no, for me is the clear answer, because it's a form of inquiry on behalf of whom, you know. So yeah, she's asking questions, but my question would be, are those questions pertinent? Are they accurate? Are they, as you say, detailed enough of drilling down? Who is she asking those questions on behalf of? You know, now that's the thing. I think in Oprah Winfrey's case, she's asking questions on behalf of an unquestioning public. So, and the difference between that and journalism is asking questions on behalf of the people in general. Good journalism is, I'm not talking about, you know, the trash. But when you put it down to its bare elements, what the press is doing, when they go to, for instance, the reason they have access to the courts in a way that the public might not, is because they're there to report on what happens in the court, which is a matter of public record. They're there to report it in a clear and incisive way so that the members of the public can read it and understand what happened in court today. And that's really important for the process of justice and democracy, in my view. You know, it's really, really important. Now, whether anyone reads the court reports, that's up to them. The fact is the information's there. And it's been delivered to you by probably quite a young journalist with good shorthand skills, who's been sent to sit in the Old Bailey all day, or wherever, or worse, a regional court somewhere. And
have you done that, Nick? You know, have you been a court reporter?
No, I have not been a court reporter, but I have sat through a very, very harrowing, I won't describe it, a very, very harrowing trial at the Old Bailey on behalf of a journalistic process. And it was, yeah, well, I mean, what that did for me is reaffirm the importance of the court reporting process, you know. And I people don't really sort of get it, you know. But you know, court reporters are also very good because they will challenge restrictions on the media. You know, they'll be well versed. Some of the things I learned in journalism school is how to, when the judge puts some sort of silencing order on the case. Now, the journalist is the one person in that court who should be thinking, how can we stop that? Because the silencing of information is the antithesis of journalism, supposedly. So why has the judge done this? Is it reasonable? Is it legal? And you know, I know people have done it. A good court reporter will know the law sometimes better, you know, the media law, and sometimes say, well, excuse me, you know, we'd like to put our case, you know, this can't be silenced. And I think these things are really important. They're really important little cogs in the machinery of our society that we don't understand and we miss. Yeah, and I think those sort of finer points of journalism, those little cogs of journalism, as they tick over in society, are being sort of glossed over by the.
And I think that the other thing, and it is important, is to look at the mischief that a lot of these regulations rules are the reason they're put there. I absolutely hate with a passion, trial by media, because what happens in a court case, for example, you know how it is, you've been there, one side will present the evidence. And it's not finished in an hour or so, or even your 50 minutes to go back to assumption. It goes on forever. So one witness will give their version of events. And if you're a journalist and just regurgitate that version of events, the public will be swayed by that version. And what happens, and that's why you're not getting the cross-examination, you're not hearing the rest of the evidence. So in a way, I think it is abhorrent to have trial by media, because people are not getting the opportunity to turn around and put a balanced argument. You have to question everything. And I think that's one of the reasons about restrictions, is you don't want to obviously make sure the peer, if it's a jury, you don't want to make sure they're prejudiced by what they might read from the media, but also not getting information out there until, if an innocent person is in the dock and they haven't had innocent until proven guilty, they haven't been tried and gone through that legal process, it's wrong to damage their name in that way. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think what we're seeing is a sort of a watered down version of the journalism about in the Oprah Winfrey case, is that Oprah asks, she gets people on her show by agreement, you know, so they, for whatever reason, for publicity, they've agreed to come on a show. I believe it's the case that they're not paid. Certainly in this case, I don't believe.
It's one of her questions, and it's interesting because you would, the follow-up question would have been something else, but the question she asked Meghan was just to confirm, you're not being paid for this interview. That's right. That's what she said. I don't know whether there's a donation elsewhere because it wasn't clarified, but I do think when you say about Oprah doing her job, she gave headlines around the world, and it would be, as they say, the biggest crisis for the monarchy over here for 85 years since Wallis Simpson and all the parallels there to come on to. But that sort of reality, Oprah did her job. She got fantastic ratings, 17 million in the US, not quite Super Bowl, but 17 million ad breaks as well, which paid for it. But you worked on that basis. So she's got your headlines. Is it journalistic to turn around and say, well, actually, when somebody makes a statement and the other side is not there to counteract that statement or to put their version of the events, or you don't ask the obvious follow-up questions, that's the bit I would object. Is probably, well, I would object.
No, I think that's a very, very good, that's a very important point, and a very good point is, you know, I mean, you know, if we're going to call this, you know, delving into the evidence, then we need other arguments. Simply, we need a representative of the monarchy, of the royal family, you know, to say, well, that's not our view on what happened, and here's what we think. You know, that's obviously not going to happen because Oprah Winfrey isn't a journalist. You know, so she's an entertainer. What she does intersects with journalism a little bit in that it generates headlines, it profits off headlines, certainly profits off scandal. But she doesn't really ask a tough question, you know, and she obviously, because there's no need to, you know, she's in a cozy environment. These people have agreed to come on now. Maybe they were paid, maybe not. I don't know. I'll believe Oprah, sure, but there will be terms and conditions to this thing. So there will be limitations on the questions that can be asked. Oprah Winfrey can suddenly not turn into a snarling Robin Day style, you know, Andrew Neil Inquisitor. That's not going to happen. You know, there are going to be limitations to what's talked about and what's not talked about, and I believe that is normal, even with, you know, reasonably lightweight celebrity interviews where I won't be questioned about my family issues or the drug addiction of my brother or things like that, and I don't want you to bring it up in this interview. That's agreed beforehand, and that's perfectly reasonable, you know. But let's not mistake this process for journalism or for evidence discovery. It's not. You know, it's not. It's a form.
I mean, I should pick you up on that though, Nick, because she started the interview by two points she made, or a number of points, but two important points as far as this is concerned. One, she asked Meghan, "Look, you're not paid," and she said yes. And the other thing is that there is nothing off limits. There is nothing off limits, and that was one of the things she said. Now, if that's right, then there are lots of things that, and I know the interview was 3 hours, 20 minutes in total. That's what they recorded, but actually whittled down to probably about an hour and a half, plus the ad breaks brought it up to 2 hours. If nothing was off limits, then there are so many other questions. Personally, I would have liked to ask, and you would have liked to ask as a journalist as well, and to turn around and say, well, they weren't asked, or if they were asked, they didn't end up in the final cut.
Yeah, well, that's it, you know, and I mean, I'm not going to make the same mistakes that Piers Morgan made and just say, I doubt the truth of what's being stated here. You know, what I would say is that Meghan and Harry aside, I would doubt the sincerity of Oprah Winfrey in the sense that I don't think she's lying. I don't think she's an agent of misrule or of lies or anything like that. But it is the Oprah Winfrey Show, which is a brand, you know, and it is a certain style. Now, when you say nothing's off limits, well, okay. do you literally mean that? Because you can ask, in which case, if I think you can ask someone anything, anything about their sex life, about their father's alcoholism, whatever. Now, I find that a little bit hard to believe. So that sounds to me a little bit P.T. Barnum. Is everything? Nothing's off limits, people. We can ask what we want. Well, you've said that, but I'm not sure those really would be the parameters. I find that hard to believe.
You would challenge it. So if the statement, I thought it was a great way of hooking people in, nothing's off. And I have a lot of respect for Oprah. Is brilliant at what she does. Absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely.
And people would say it's an iron fist in a velvet glove. And she does. She will go back to various things and everything else. But you would turn around and say, so when you make the statement about there were concerns expressed about the color of the unborn child's skin, you would turn around and say, well, look, if nothing is off limits, surely it's no point just my asking the questions. The answers have to be forthcoming, because if you make something as incendiary as that as a statement, and then to make it worse, and I do think it makes it worse, you rule out 2 people. There are not that many more. The pressure actually goes on to the remaining ones who you haven't named. So apparently afterwards, and it was not in a court of law, it was sort of hearsay twice removed, if you like, because what happens, Oprah asked Meghan. Meghan said it wasn't said directly to her, but it was a report from Harry. I mean, sorry, when you talk about hearsay somewhere, you want to turn around and say, look,
hearsay, Your Honour.
Yeah, exactly. What, when, why, how, what was the context, what was the intention? Because even Thomas Markle, who came on British television the day after, he was on with Piers Morgan, we'll come on to him. Piers Morgan, he asked him, he said he saw that he doesn't think there's a racist bone in the body of the, well, how does he know? He doesn't know that at all either. So all it is opinion. And I think what happens is, if you make a statement which is a generalized statement, everybody, all generalizations are false, is the saying.
Exactly.
Is drilled down. And my concern is this, is that you've got the headline news, 2 of the hottest topics in the world at the moment about race and about mental health, and actually tremendous work that has been done, positive things to stamp out genuine racism and I'm not saying it's not genuine because we need to drill down, but real issues, and real issues about focus on mental health. And what the royals have done to actually shine a spotlight and to make sure we are the generation that talks about mental health, so that the others don't suffer the stigma. So if you don't drill down into what was said, yes, of course it's abhorrent, but let's look at what was actually said and work out what was meant in that context. Is that right? An abhorrent sentence doesn't mean that what you're saying, without getting all the context and everything, doesn't need clarification. And it's that clarification which is missing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And I think it's and what you're seeing consequently is trial by media. Is a sort of flowery version. The Oprah is trial by media. And the people on trial are the royal family. Now, I've no doubt that's a very difficult institution to live within, and I'm not privy to any information that anyone else is. But, there are certain ways and protocols, and I'm sure it's terribly dreary, particularly if you're not part of that establishment, to have to confront that. Not just dreary, difficult, outright difficult. I don't want to belittle Meghan Markle's problems with that. I imagine it's an enormous imposition and a difficulty. And however much it's explained to you in advance, she would have been briefed at length by, palace officials.
Oh, well, she said she wasn't. She wasn't briefed. I mean, to her, and you get those charming moments when she said she was in a car and she was going to meet the Queen for the first time, and Harry goes over to say, you have to curtsy. Do you know how to curtsy? I just, well, I didn't know I had to curtsy. I thought that was just a public thing. And so there was a moment when she practiced outside, and it was the deepest curtsy you could ever imagine. And she also said that she didn't Google anything about Harry, didn't really know anything about being a royal and so on and so forth. And at face value, you would turn around and say, well, is that right? Because she said she had to Google things like the words to the national anthem and all those sort of, and the other stuff.
Well, I find that extraordinary. I mean, if that's true, then they have let her down quite significantly, I think, because, at the end of the day, this isn't just a family or a posh family or a rich family. They are the family of the head of the British state. She's the head of state, you know, and people forget that. The Queen, you know, the Queen, whether you love her or loathe her or whatever, she's the head of the British state. That is an important, you know, it's a constitutional position. It makes her a world leader in that sense. And yeah, for them, therefore, to introduce a new member of the family and to not brief her quite forensically on what's expected of her, you know, I think is quite shameful, if that's indeed what happened. And I'm not.
And this is my point. I don't know. Is the honest answer at the moment. What I do know is, as a lawyer and as an interviewer and so on and so forth, is that what you do is you very rarely ask a question you don't know the answer to.
Exactly, yes, same as a journalist, actually.
You know, it's the standard thing. So I'm sure that there is shock revelations and so on and so forth. I'm sure there must have been a discussion before the interview about some of the things and how that was going to pan out. And there might be a few choice phrases. I love the analogy with the Little Mermaid, where Meghan was sort of saying that she felt like the Little Mermaid who fell in love with a prince and lost her voice. I thought there's some beautiful poetic,
a very good way of communicating to her audience as well. Actually,
absolutely, you know, and to her credit. But I also think, and the point I want to make, Nick, is that I don't want the really important issues to be diminished by people saying we shouldn't look at this, because I say I'm a massive advocate about mental health, as you know, a massive advocate to get rid of all the isms. But I also want to balance that so that we don't become so woke that we take offense at everything, because taking offense at everything means, I think, it devalues those areas where there are real concerns. That's my view.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. And I think there is nothing wrong with holding Meghan Markle or Prince Harry up to a certain standard of accountability within reasonable terms. You know, no one's suggesting they go on trial or face, you know, some of the most inquisitorial and deadly QCs in the world. You know, I've seen them in action, as you have before, you know, in the Old Bailey, where, you know, the cross-examination are, you know, things of a different level. You know, no one's suggesting that Meghan and Harry should endure that kind of stuff. But I would have, as you said, I would have preferred a little bit more, you know, the other side to the story, for instance, would have been nice. And that's something that Oprah significantly never gives, you know. And you'll see, you know, it's standard in every press story where one party is contacted for their view on what happened in XYZ. They will give their view, and then, as is always correct journalistic procedure, the other side is contacted for their view, and that will be printed too. And so you often see at the bottom of the article, Jeremy Corbyn was not available for comment, or Boris, whatever. We attempted to contact the office of Boris Johnson and we've got no reply. So they made an effort. They tried to get their opinion. We've got a print deadline. They didn't get back to us. We've gone to print anyway with one opinion, but they've made it clear they tried. Now, Oprah Winfrey doesn't even do that. You know, it's sort of presented as an inquisitorial process that already has a predetermined outcome, you know, which is sympathetic to the people being interviewed largely. And I think that is a problem for meaning and truth. I'm not saying my understanding of, I don't know, life in general, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes with Harry and Meghan. I can pretty much guarantee you there's a lot going on that we may never know about, and there's things that have happened. And as there should be.
As there is in everybody's life. I mean, everybody has issues. Everybody has issues with their families. Everybody has issues with friends. Everybody has issues.
Yeah, and it's going to be private. And also, as we've said, you know, the Queen as the head of that family and the head of state she's going to be subject to, you know, what I might call the security apparatus. You know, she's the head of state, so she's being protected by, you know, the security services of the country up to a point. I don't know to what extent, probably quite heavily. So there are things that you're never going to see, and that's fine, you know. But for my understanding of life is that the truth often lies somewhere in the middle, you know. And
totally in the middle. And I think, but if you only present, and firstly, and there are so many important issues, and I think this is the problem, is making sure that we're not devaluing the issues. Far from it. Yes. You and I are absolute advocates, and particularly about mental health, which is how we first met, is talking about those sort of situations.
Yeah.
What we want to do, though, is to make sure that just because you raise the mental health card or you raise the race card, it doesn't mean that you stop asking questions.
No, absolutely. And I think that's the point we've got to, you know. I mean, and I think that's where Piers Morgan went wrong, you know, in his I don't think he's a very good journalist in the way that he's gone through his career, because he's he's a product of regional news, like most British journalists, you know. So he came from Peterborough and, you know, raised on the local newspaper there. And he will have in his background and in his mind a correct way to approach these things. And I think I'm a bit of a traditionalist. That's the way journalists should be trained, you know, and it's kind of an apprenticeship process through local media. Now, there's a way that gets done. And Piers Morgan has long since abandoned any of those things and has become a kind of an Oprah Winfrey style, you know, antagonist. I mean, okay, she does the soft thing, he does the other thing. But I think where he's really gone wrong is to sit there and say, I don't believe a single word that Meghan Markle just said. Well, that's incompetent. You know, that is just blowhard opinion of the lowest variety in my mind. That's not journalism, certainly. Now, he might say he's addressing his audience or whatever. Nonsense. He's just lost his temper and he said something really foolish. And his colleague then prompted him and said, well, she did talk about suicide. And, you know, and he doubled down on himself and said, well, I just don't, you know. That's what she says.
I mean, to be fair to him, and it had, I mean, more complaints than they've had for a programme for a very long time. I don't know what the figures are, 21 million. I mean, a zillion, 14 million. It's one of those sort of things. A lot of people complain because getting offensive about that sort of stuff, and including people from Mind and so on and so forth. He did clarify that later on, to his credit, that if there were people with issues, then of course take them seriously, and people should be encouraged to talk out and so on and so forth. So he did clarify that, and to an extent. Is in, as I say, the B.T. Barnum statement, if you want to draw a crowd, start a fight. Piers is that sort of antagonism where you turn around and say, this is that confrontational style of journalism where it is absolutely, you've employed a pit bull, don't be surprised if he bites, because that's what you've employed.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's true. And I think that, you know, I mean, and the press has long since operated on those kind of terms. You know, that's going back to the kind of what used to be called the yellow journalism of the Hearst newspapers, where they'd either make up stories completely in order to sell newspapers, or take belligerent stances and enforce them. You know, and this stuff has been going on for a long time. I think where it goes wrong a little bit with that is you need to kind of be right in your own terms. You know, now he didn't have any evidence for what he said. That's the thing. You know, and so someone has talked about suicide and I would give them the benefit of the doubt, whoever they are. You know, I wouldn't just dismiss that out of hand. And that's what he's done. Now, yeah, okay, he went back and apologized later. But as we know in the press, you know, an apology is no good because the headline's already been written, you know, and that's why it was such a big deal for Elton John to get a front page apology from the Sun, which he insisted on as part of the legal deal. Because as a journalist, I was taught that, you know, you get an apology. The apology I had to make for my little libel moment, we did what journalists always do. We stuck it. They weren't lawyers, their lawyers weren't smart enough to know what we were going to do, which is stick it right at the back of the magazine, right under in a little postage size stamp. And, you know, I think that Piers he just needed to be right about that. You know, I don't think you can just say things like that gratuitously, fire it out into the air. Yeah, be a controversialist, yeah, be a pit bull, but somehow have a sense of rightness on your side, be morally right or be right in what you're saying.
I think it goes back to the job of a journalist, if you like. And when I talk about the truth about, that's what we want to try and do. We want to we're asking questions. We're not judgmental. It's not our job to be judgmental. What we want to try and do is to get to the bottom of the story. And what I really like is get both sides from different things, talk to many different people, and let the public decide. But based on intrinsic and have a look, forensic questioning about who makes a statement. So don't just let that statement float, question it. It doesn't have to be aggressive, but it's helpful to get to the truth. It's only aggressive if people try to regurgitate the same thing in different ways without backing it up. So I think Piers was wrong, and he's admitted he was wrong, to turn around and say, I don't believe a word she says. Well, if there's a genuine cry for help, we don't want to diminish all the great work in mental health and say, if people are there, absolutely talk to somebody. There should be a mechanism. There may be questions about, was there really nobody in the palace who could offer that support, bearing in mind what Prince Harry and Prince William and various other royals have done tremendous work about mental health. Would it really not be talking to your husband, and who should I talk to, and so on and so forth? I don't know. I would like to have asked those sort of questions to work.
That's right. Yeah, it'd be nice if someone. And I think that's where Piers let us down a little bit. I mean, he get you a lot. Is there was an opportunity there for him to say something like, "Okay, so Meghan Markle said she felt suicidal at some point. That's obviously a very challenging situation for anybody." And actually, something she said about that, Andrew, really rang a bell with me. Where she said that she was she just was suddenly confronted by a single clear thought of suicide. And that had never happened to her before. Now that really struck me as authentic, because I've encountered that myself. I'd gone through my relatively comfortable existence, never understanding how, for instance, how someone might want to commit suicide or even feel that way. I just couldn't understand it. I sympathised with them. I felt sorry for people, but I said to myself, there always must be a way out, right? You can always talk to someone. And I remember the day, I remember the exact day, I was confronted for the first time in my life by a single clear thought of suicide. And something terrible had happened. And suddenly the thought of the pain in your head just stopping was crystal clear in my mind. And it suddenly made sense to me. I was in a lot of mental health pain. And I just thought, and I remember thinking that in the previous few days, the only relief I got was when I slept, and which was using sleeping pills. I'd get to sleep, and then pain would stop, and then you wake up in the morning, it start again. And suddenly it occurred to me, I could stop this pain forever. I could just make it stop now. That relief that I'm feeling when I sleep. And that was this crystal clear thought of suicide. And I that really rang a bell. When she said that, I just thought, that's actually someone who's experienced this, whatever had happened to her, it's not, we shouldn't speculate. But if someone is talking in those terms, then it's beholden on us, on everyone to listen. It really is, because they are suddenly at risk in a way that you don't realise. And I think where Piers let himself down he's a leading. I mean, he's one of the biggest media figures in the world. His connections and resources are second to none. If he knows something about what was really going on in the palace, and he must know people who know stuff, bring that as evidence. So, in his show, say, well, I don't believe that Meghan Markle said was true, because what we have from sources close to the parent is that X, Y, and Z was said instead. Now, you might not want to question her suicide ideation, but you can certainly question a lot of the other things she said by bringing to bear journalistic resources and uncovering the truth, And that's what he didn't do. Yeah. He just bludgeoned in and said, I don't believe a single word she said. Well, I think that's incompetent, really. And he's a pit bull, but also that's, and furthermore, he's done harm now to the world of, we've come a long way in the last 20 years, as you and I both know, where, depression and anxiety and thoughts of suicide, these very challenging ideas, are becoming normalized in a good way. That's to say, you can now say, I suffer from depression, or anxiety has come a long way that we recognize now. And a lot of people start to understand. Piers' voice, just dismissing it out of hand, that's a dynasty. That's Britain from the past, Just pull your socks. I don't believe a word you're saying,
And it's interesting, because I also don't think that sort of journalism works. I mean, you find, it's the aggressive sort of a journalism when you're not necessarily listening to what the other person says. If you challenge it logically and with a bit of charm and a bit of forensically, you can actually, you'll get to the truth, and that's the whole point. If you just want to fight because that's your clickbait and that's your headline, it's not as effective. And sometimes people pull it away. So, for example, for a long time, lots of ministers wouldn't go on the programme because he gave a very hard time. They would know it's just Piers is going to have a pop at you, as opposed to doing your job, which is actually turning around and questioning. If you question them and try and get to the truth, as opposed to try and make them look rubbish, it's a very different point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly, and that's one of the reasons I support the interviewing technique of say, Andrew Neil is a good example, because
Andrew Eborn, he's very good as well.
He is very good indeed. Yes, he is. Yes, but I mean, people say, oh, Andrew Neil is a conservative. He's a well-known Tory. Okay, he is conservative, but he doesn't let that interfere with his line of questioning. And what he's simply trying to do is to ask the questions he wants to ask that are headed towards a certain purpose. And that is kind of what we need a little bit more of, and he's not trying to humiliate them or embarrass them. Now, if Boris Johnson goes on the Andrew Neil show and ends up humiliated and embarrassed, that's on Boris Johnson. But Andrew Neil hasn't done anything to do that. He simply asked him pertinent and inquisitive questions about his behaviour. And, you know, I seem to remember some time ago now when Boris was pretty well humiliated on the Andrew Neil show. And he came out the next day and said, well, that's my fault. You know, I wasn't prepared properly for these questions. I thought I'd just bluster my way through it. And he caught me out. And he said, that's Andrew's job. You know, and yes, it's embarrassing.
Journalists do work. The point I was making earlier, most people know the answers to the questions before they ask it, but they also know the journey they want to go on. So all journalists are worth their salt. It may actually be, I know what the story is. How am I going to lead people to that way? Now, that is sometimes okay. Other times you might genuinely want to have this as a journey of discovery, but obviously prepare for it, work out the different points so you can justify that, but keep an open mind, because that way you can let the audience decide rather than you being judge, jury, inquisitor, and everything else.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's very true. And I think that's where you get a very pointed and persistent line of rational inquiry, such as Andrew Neil, for instance. I keep using Andrew Neil, there's Brian Walden, Robin Day, people like that, is that they're not trying to humiliate you at all. Two, they're representing the people. And this is really important to me. They're asking those questions on behalf of the people, you know, and they're not asking them on questions on behalf of the shareholders of the Oprah Winfrey, if there are any shareholders. They're asking on behalf of the citizens of the country. So if we've got the Home Secretary of the day in front of us, the reason I'm giving him a tough time is because he's accountable and he needs to, or she needs to, answer these questions which are reasonable and based in reason, and which question their behaviour. The Home Secretary's got a whole different line of questions that they want to answer, and it's a journalist's job to prevent that and try and get some measure of the truth, I think. And that's what we're not seeing, you know, in this whole show business farrago of Harry. I understand why they don't want to submit themselves to that kind of inquiry. I totally understand. The royal family are completely unaccountable about these things, pretty much, as far as I can see, and because they are who they are. So really, we're not getting the story, you know. And it's sad because I think at the heart of it, someone has suffered, you know, undoubtedly. That person is probably Meghan Markle to a large extent. And, you know, I'm not just saying she's the victim or they're the bad guys or I'm not getting into any of that. But someone has suffered. There has been a mental health issue or crisis, and it has not been handled properly then, possibly, or certainly not now. And, you know, I don't think she's helping her case either, actually.
I think it's right. And I think also, as I like to have this balance, I think you often find it's the people who are the most extreme, the ones who seem the most confident, the ones who seem the most bullish, who themselves have their inner demons. And I'm sure Piers has had many challenges in his life. I'm sure he's not feeling...
Oh, no doubt. He's got it written all over him.
No, absolutely. And you'll often find there will be issues, and we all have issues. I mean, everybody in their life, mental health, mental wealth, that's what you want to sort of talk about things. If you break your leg, people sign the cast, you know, we make a joke about it. It used to be a real stigma talking about mental health, but now there are more and more people talking about it. And as I say, by talking about it, we'll be the generation to make sure that the next doesn't suffer the stigma. But I think the important point is that everybody has mental issues. They do. Everybody has mental challenges.
Yes.
It affects people to varying degrees. What's happened within, I understand there must be tremendous pressure to be part of the institution, part of the royal family. I get that. And it always used to be never complain, never explain. That was the old Benjamin Disraeli approach from the royal family. But they've been forced through various other things. And there's been lots of things where they couldn't sit back and say nothing, although it might have previously people would say there's a dignity in saying nothing. The reality is these are such hot topics about race and mental health that they had to come out and say something. What did you make of their statement? Did you have a chance to see it?
Not yet. No. Please tell me.
Let me pull it up for you. Here we go. I'll pull it up. There you go. So this is the statement on behalf of Royal Communications. It happened late last night, just before the 6 o'clock news here. 61 words. The following statement is issued by Buckingham Palace on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen. The whole family is saddened to learn the full extent of how challenging the last few years have been for Harry and Meghan. The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning. While some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately. Harry, Meghan and Archie will always be loved, much loved members. Harry, Meghan and Archie will always be much loved family members. End.
Mm. Yes, that's interesting. I mean, the thing that immediately hits you over the head with it is its brevity compared to the compared to the 3-hour long interview. So they've deliberately chosen a brief, terse isn't perhaps the right word, but a brief statement. I think that's the right way to go. That's what I think any PR professional would do in response to these allegations, is to say little. They've said something, which is good. There's no point in denouncing it. There's absolutely no point from this kind of pulpit to try and denounce what Harry and Meghan have said. There's no point. And simply to maintain a dignified front. Hopefully what they say about investigating these allegations will bear some fruit. I somehow doubt that will happen, but I think I was thinking about this the other day. I think the one thing that we can hope for out of this is that there seems to have been some kind of re-establishing of the relationship between Prince William and Prince Harry, so that perhaps there will be a chance for the two royal brothers to reconcile, and I think that's really important. I think it's really important for the.
We also don't know exactly what's happening. Brothers, families fall out all the time, and Meghan, as I say, herself with her own family, they have issues there. You had Thomas, who now lives her father, who lives 70 miles away from them now. He comes on the news. He's desperate, he says, to speak to his daughter and see his grandson Archie and see what we now know will be his granddaughter. And what's interesting, I think, Nick, about this statement, a number of things. It's a predictable response from the palace. Firstly, it's the Queen wanted to sleep on it. She didn't apparently rush off and make the statement.
Sure.
Expressing sadness, I think that's the general emotion I would certainly share about the thing. So she's not dismissing the side. There are relevant things, I think, in there about while some recollections may vary. I mean, that's
a key phrase. Yeah,
exactly. As a lawyer, you turn around and say, well, that's challenging that, and that's why I say evidence-based. And we heard about recollections varying, for example, about who was in tears when they had bridesmaids, whether it's going to be Meghan was in tears or whether it was actually, as it first came out, Kate was in tears. I suspect both of them were. They're very emotional occasions, as we all know, preparing for big things. But either way, recollections may vary. They do say they'll be taken very seriously. I don't think they'll be allowed to get away with addressing by the family privately, because the world spotlight is still on them, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and that's right. And I think they've had quite a lot of spotlights on them lately that are genuinely uncomfortable. And obviously the Prince Andrew case is in my mind much worse and more scandalous than this. But I mean, I think you're right, and they need, I think, proceed with caution, as they always do. I think that's the right. It's the royal family doing what they do, but I mean, it would be nice to see some kind of solid result, I suppose, out of this that somehow benefits the royal family, and that leaves Meghan and Harry feeling that they've not been completely, that this final revelation, I hope it's the final revelation, has not been completely dismissed. Now,
I don't believe it will be the final revelation. I mean, Oprah has done interviews about the interview. As I say, 3 hours 20 minutes she recorded in total. And obviously Harry and Meghan now have deals with Netflix and Spotify because they need to pay for their security, is what they said. And I have a lot of sympathy. I have a lot of sympathy for that sort of side. They need to. If they don't have an income other than what's left by Diana to Harry, then I get it.
I've got no problem with that. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, the nature of revelations is that they never stop, to some extent. And there are still people promoting revelations about Princess Diana that, I mean, how Butler, I believe, made a sort of little career out of revelations. But it depends how honest people want to be with this. The royal family are not going to be a source of revelations unless they are carefully leaking information for some reason. The source of revelations is going to come from Harry and Meghan. Now, I hope that they are able to draw a line under this now, and I hope the palace respond in a sensible way, and that they're able to sort of find a way forward, which again I believe morally might be the kind of reconciliation of the two princes. which I'm sure will be very popular with the public. That may take a little while, but if that can happen, then I think there's some chance for the stability of the monarchy in the future. I'm sure William would want that to happen because he's going to be the king. He doesn't want an estranged brother when he's on the throne, whenever that is. You know, if it's 5 years, 10 years, tomorrow, I don't know. He doesn't want an estranged brother festering in Hollywood, spewing resentment in the way that the Duke of Windsor did, you know, in terrible, you know, this sort of, I mean, I know Harry was never the king or going to be the king, but there are some unfortunate similarities between this and the abdication, you know, and the last thing you want is them dripping poison from a foreign place and holding the attention of the press and some sympathy even. You know, it's just going to get worse for them. It's going to get worse for the palace. So hopefully this reconciliation process will bear fruit, and I think that's probably the way forward. You know, and the Queen can only be the Queen. You know, she can only really issue statements like that and say the things the Queen always says. You know, whatever she's feeling in her heart, she never say it. I think the future has to lie now with the future king. And with Harry, hopefully.
You've skipped a generation as well, because obviously there's the relationship. I mean, next in line with the throne is Harry's father. Yes.
Well, I always do. I always do skip. I mean, I always assume that it's just going to skip over to William or some sort of interregnum. You know, I don't know what goes on. He's a bit of an enigma, Prince Charles, isn't it? I don't really know. The Queen does the Queen. She does duty. She does service. She does loyalty. All that stuff. And you know, Charles is a bit more an enigma. You know, he's always been a bit more himself, and I don't know. I just don't know where that lies. And you know, then we start to get into family politics. I don't know anything of it really.
It is difficult because, again, very public things were said about Charles and Harry, and how Charles wouldn't take his phone call for a little bit, but they're speaking now,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. And again, because things are left unsaid, people are speculating, and when people speculate, just as we touched on earlier, people become an expert on everything. So they
exactly.
I think that the reality is there is a lot of good that can be done, a lot of good that Her Majesty does, in particular about the Commonwealth, about talking about community, about the value of family, a lot of good that can be done in the mental health area, saying let's talk about issues, encouraging people to talk so they're not alone, and to say there are resources, there is help available there. What I don't want to find is that the generalizations diminish from the great work. We need lessons to be learned, absolutely. Let's drill down into specifics, because that way you don't get cursed with the generalizations. You actually say, well, if it's there, let's stamp it out. Let's look at that and make sure, let's learn from the lessons. Because also, if you don't put it in context, you've no idea what the intention is.
No.
Perception is the ultimate deception. And so often perception and reality are not aligned. So we need to carry out that forensic exercise.
That we do, and that's very astute, and I think that's one of the things, you know, that one of some of the criticism that leveled recently against Meghan Markle and is that they're immensely privileged people, and what have they got to complain about? Well, for me, that's a ridiculous argument, you know, because we all know, we all see it happens. You know, how many times has it happened in the press where we've seen a person of wealth and standing and fame commit suicide, you know, or end up dead from a drug overdose, or in a rehab clinic because of their alcoholism. These things don't buy you happiness. They don't prevent suicide. You know, when did money prevent suicide? You know, I'd argue that it is a catalyst for suicide in some ways. And that, you know, if I think all of us at the heart of our being, we need a purpose to be the person we are. You know, we need a reason to be. And I can well imagine that removed from her normal environment, removed from her purpose in life, which was to be an actress, removed from her family and her friends, and you know, you might just want to characterize them as the Hollywood liberati or whatever, but this is her environment, this is her friends. She's removed from that and dumped in this really weird family. Frankly, they are really weird, however much you support them or not. And one's entire purpose for living might suddenly be challenged. Actually, it doesn't matter that you live in a palace or that you are surrounded by handmaidens, and your husband's the best bloke in the world. All those things become nothing, I think, in the face of not having a meaning in your life. And it's not beholden on anyone to find meaning as the head of a charity, for instance. So why didn't she just, take up the landmines charity or take up the AIDS charity like Diana did? Well, that's up to her. That's her life to be lived. It's not, if it's not satisfactory for her to do that kind of thing, in the way, for instance, that Princess Anne seems to have found sense and meaning in life by working tirelessly for charities, that's not going to be for everyone, and neither should it be. It doesn't mean you're selfish or you're ungenerous. She needs to find her own way in life, and she was removed from a successful path by her own choice, admittedly, into this unusual world. And it's entirely possible that she didn't see it coming, and particularly if she wasn't briefed. But even then, culturally and emotionally, it's a big ask for anyone. And I think that needs to be restored. Whatever the he said, she said arguments that are trading back and forth from Meghan Markle and the palace, as again, I'm sure a lot of it is just hearsay, and the truth is in the middle. But I think for her peace of mind and her mental health stability, she'll need to find that role in life. It might be as a Netflix producer, I don't know, and good luck to her. I don't judge people on what they do. And her husband needs to go with her. They're obviously in this together. I hesitate always to call life and its experiences a journey. I see them more as a predicament, and they're in this predicament together, and that is heartening. They seem to be committed to one another in the way that, Wallace Simpson and David were committed. They seemed to be together. They were a unit. Whether they were right or wrong, doesn't matter. They were a unit together, and that obviously sustained them as people. And that's really important. And I think if Harry and Meghan have got that, they've got their kids, they will undoubtedly make good money, out of these deals. As long as they're not exploiting that, as long as they're not cynical, as long as they find some reason to be happy, get by day to day, then I think things will probably start to recede a little bit, and the anger and the resentment,
Yeah, that's a sort of PR thing. I mean, the point that you make about fame and money and all that sort of stuff doesn't affect mental health. Actually, it can be a massive contributor. If you prick me, do I not bleed? If you tickle me, do I not laugh? We are all the same as far as that is concerned. And the parallels with Wallace and King Edward, as he then was, were absolutely, the people will do that. And people even looking at the dress that she wore for the interview, and they'll pull up a picture of Wallace Simpson. They look very similar.
It did look very similar.
They did, I know. And I'm sure there are possibilities that people were managing it. If they were, then people would want to draw those analogies in the same way as you would when you're talking about Harry's mother and so on and so forth. The reality is, absolutely, is there some element of truth? I think there is absolutely an element of truth in all of this. What we need to work out is the truth about the reality means you need to be a bit more forensic. Let's hear both sides. What I do hope is that the real issues, I'd say race and mental health and the various other things as well, are not prejudiced as a result of the great work which has happened. Let's shine a spotlight, let's carry on that great work and make sure that we stamp out the real examples of that sort of stuff and recognize a cry for help when one is made.
No, absolutely. And exactly, I think that's very right. And I think it's, as an overall point, and perhaps by sort of way of a general conclusion, is that I think we could all use a bit more empathy for one another, a little touch of kindness. It's very easy now more than ever, and I'm just as guilty of this as the next person, of reacting rather than responding. So when Meghan Markle or whoever it is makes a statement that might seem to you hypocritical because she's a privileged individual, and what has she got to complain about? Well, okay, maybe, but also maybe there's something else going on there. And I think we're beholden. It's beholden on us to sort of, this is going to sound hopelessly naive, but just to have a little moment to care for each other a little bit more. We're all human. We're all subject to these things. And even if you haven't had a day's worth of mental health trouble in your life, I can tell you now, it could happen tomorrow and at some point in your life. And just have a little step back and say, what has really gone on here? I don't think people go onto the mass media in the way that they have simply to manipulate the truth in order to make a profit or whatever. I don't believe that's happened at all. In their minds, at least, this has happened. It's there. It's something that's, and something has triggered that. And I think, it's beholden on us all to say, well, perhaps we can have a little bit of understanding for this, because mental health problems are complicated, and the reasons they arise are even more complicated. And we don't really know what someone else has gone through. So, it's apparent from what we read in the press, that Meghan Markle's upbringing may not have been perfect, you know, that kind of stuff. Well, I can tell you now, if it doesn't seem perfect, it wasn't. And it was probably a lot worse than it seems, you know. And a lot of people don't talk about that. You know, it took me a long time to talk about my upbringing with an alcoholic mother and the complete disorder that caused in my life and how it's affected me as an adult. I couldn't say it until it was in my 40s. You know, it's entirely possible that there's a lot we don't know about Meghan Markle's upbringing, for instance, and never assume, you know, never assume, because
absolutely. And I think also, and it's worth making the point, is that when we're saying forensically question things, we're not necessarily saying forensically question whether that was her impression that there was no help available. And I think that's so important as well. We're not questioning if somebody has a genuine cry for help. The only person who knows is the person concerned. When you're making a statement there, if you say something, there was no help available, the question is not whether you perceive there may be no help, because that perception, your perception may be absolute, that's what you felt. Doesn't mean there was no help, and you can maybe look into that. So I think those are really important points. But you're right, compassion and empathy and so on and so forth are just really important. No, I think stop it, walk a few miles in somebody else's moccasins.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't think, you know, we don't need to sort of become all sentimental and cloying. Just a little bit of, just take a moment to think, what has provoked this person to say this thing, you know? And I, you know, I think you'll find the truth. Just a little more kindness, you know. I'm absolutely trying to send the waves back here, like, you know, it feels like you. But I think internally we can all do this, you know. So we cannot change the current tides of cultural opinion and the way things seem to be. We can't do anything about that, but we can change and make an
I don't think we can, though, Nick. I think we can help, because by providing a different narrative, and if we bang on about, as I always do, question everything, the truth about, let's have a look at this other stuff. Don't just regurgitate accepting your own prejudices. Work out, if people are saying that, don't just rubbish people and hide behind anonymity of social media, because
that's it.
So I think we can change the narrative. We're in a position where whoever may listen to us, if we at least repeat that message often enough, it will get through to somebody, won't it?
Yeah, well, it will. And I think, and change begins here, you know, with the individual. And then so it's your choice when you go out tomorrow, when you open Facebook in a minute or whatever it is, it's your choice what happens next, you know. And unless you are yourself suffering from some kind of serious mental health imbalance where you can't see the wood for the trees, I suppose, you have a choice about how you react and respond to things in everyday life, you know. And that's something I really picked up in therapy and rehab, is that, you know, just consider what happens next, you know, to any given situation or opinion. You know, that it's not perfect, you can't do it all the time, you will slip up, but just maybe take a little measure of the situation. And I think if we all incorporate a bit more kindness in our lives, kindness towards ourselves, not least, then that's where the change begins. Because if we all start to do it individually, you know, then it should pass on. And I think personally, kindness begets kindness. You know, that if someone, I mean, a good friend of mine the other day experienced a random act of kindness in the form of a financial donation and for a charity. And the impact that had on the people involved was significant. They said, I can't believe people would be so kind to just give their time and money so freely. And it made a real impact on them. And they will now be more inclined when they're in the hot seat, you know, maybe they'll be kind to someone else. And you know, it does sound, again, hopelessly naive, but kindness begets kindness in the same way that anger begets anger and panic begets panic and anxiety or whatever. You know, we can choose kindness to some extent. And simply by the act of not being unkind, you know, just, you know, if you've got something unkind to say about Meghan Markle, and I have on social media in the past, perhaps just don't say that, you know, because other people are reading it. And are you sure?
It's the cheap shot. It's the cheap shot looking for light. So if you can be anything, be kind. I think that's it's nice. And one of the, and it's not a political statement, but one of the things I like best about the fact that Joe Biden was elected, and I say it's not a political statement, is that his name is an anagram. So Joe Biden is be joined. And I quite like in the current climate where we're so divided, and they do say that nothing unites us more than a common enemy. Well, we're so divided on these issues and so on and so forth. It would be great to be joined.
It would, and actually, I didn't realise, I hadn't considered that, but also in his inauguration speech, of course, he mentions the word unity 6 times. So that's the theme of his presidency, supposedly.
He missed the slogan. Andrew Eborn comes up with slogans. It should have been Biden, by Don. I think that would have been a political thing.
That would have been very good.
But Joe Biden, be joined, would have been perfect. Yeah. He can send you royalties, so do the T-shirts.
Well, they did miss a trick there. You should be employed as a communication correspondent for the Wire. But yeah, no, I mean, look, I agree. I mean, I think that it would be nice. Maybe it's naive. It would be nice to, and some people are never going to accept hearing it from Joe Biden of all people. But it would be nice for a little bit of unity. But well, we'll see how that works out. But in the meantime, I think kindness. We can all be kind. Doesn't matter who you vote for. Doesn't matter if you vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whoever. Your inner being, your inner person is still yourself, and your values are still your values. It doesn't matter who comes along and asks you to vote for them. The things you swear by and live your life by, those values are yours. And for most people, I imagine, kindness is one of them. It's there somewhere. We all inherently want to be kind to one another because we're all connected, and we all feel that sense of, even if we hate the world that day, there is still a sense that we are connected to one another somehow. Yeah. And if someone walks by you in the street and suddenly collapses and they look like they're having a heart attack, a lot of people are going to help because it connects. And if the ones that don't help, it's simply because they're scared. It's not because they don't care, I think. And I think we just need to connect with that a little bit more.
And the other theme as well is just respecting other people's opinions. You can respect the fact that people have different opinions, but let people help them make informed decisions. If you can get the facts, get it from several different sources, question everything. It's by doing that you'll get to informed decision. Finally, Nick, I mean, how are you doing?
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, so I'm fine. Thank you for asking. I mean, what I've the challenges I face in sort of maintaining my own mental health are remain, to be frank. So I'm terrible at focusing on my own self-care, for instance. Self-care is really vital to maintain your mental stability. You need to look after yourself. Sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but absolutely lost on a lot of people, including myself. And for me, self-care would involve things like not focusing just on work or the writing I do, not sitting hunched in front of a laptop all day, but not eating because I'm so obsessed with what I'm doing. I do that still, unfortunately, but it's a work in progress. Change is a process, and I am at least aware of it now. Whereas 2 years ago I wasn't, and that was one of the things leading me to drink. So I faced those challenges in terms of things like drinking and the addicted. It's fine. I mean, I'm much more in control of the voices I have, the sort of siren voices that lead you to that path. And I hear them, I'm aware of it now, which I wasn't before. So, one of the most valuable things I learned from therapy, and which I think of today, if I'm struggling, feeling down or whatever, is that change is a process. It's not a linear path from A to B to C to D. It goes all over the place. Change kind of, it's a sort of a zigzag. And I think that was a real moment of revelation for me when I sort of clicked on that. That I don't have to be walking a straight path. I simply have to be walking the path that's right for me in terms of my progress. Now, that would involve, for instance, not drinking alcohol. It would involve routinely seeing a therapist, or whatever it is, self-care. And those things are slotting in place more. What I'm dealing with, and what a lot of people with mental health problems are dealing with, is a lifetime of damaging routine. So they're trapped in a lifetime of routine, which seems to them perfectly normal. That's just what I do. I get up every morning, I put the television on, I have a cigarette, I drink 3 cups of coffee, and that's what I've always done. Now, you can explain to someone why that might be a damaging routine, and they can understand. But then changing it in real terms is very difficult. A routine is a hardwired habit in your brain. It's actually hardwired into your neural pathways. And so changing those things is hard. I still do that. I still struggle with my daily routines, but I'm aware of it, and I think one of the things I learned in therapy, and it's a valuable lesson for anyone in recovery of any kind, is that it takes time. You have to be patient. And I'm not a patient person. I'm impatient with myself more than anything. And we live in an impatient world, in impatient societies where everything needs to be immediate. And that makes it very, very challenging for people with mental health issues, because change, positive change, becomes incrementally as part of a slow process that is not straightforward. And I think once you accept that those things are true, and you know that that's what's happening, you can relax a lot more. You can say, well, I'm not going to cure myself from alcoholism within 90 days, like Alcoholics Anonymous suggests you can. That's just not going to happen. It might take me the rest of my life, but at least I know that now, you know, and that desperate urge to fix yourself and then fail and then drink and recriminate and hate yourself and then loop again, repeat, rinse and repeat. You start to break that cycle. You start to say, well, I'm in recovery. You know, I simply, this takes time, you know, and that for me was a key to unlocking the situation I'm in now, I suppose, which is, you know, where I'm out of therapy. I mean, I still see a psychologist, but I'm out of intense therapy. I'm on my own in the world, in the sense of, you know, I'm released from rehab, and I've had, you know, yeah, at times it's terrifying. You know, you think it's just me and the void, you know, it's just me and a bottle of vodka. I'm a bottle of vodka away from disaster. But then what I do is take comfort from the fact that I'm aware that this is a process. This will take time. You know what the bottle of vodka will do for you. You've experienced it multiple times. But what I've also experienced over the last 2 years is the emotional impact of being part of this process of change. And, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous, sometimes I'm critical of them, sometimes I support them. But one of the things they say is keep coming back. If it didn't work for you today, come back tomorrow and see how it works then. And I think that's very, very true. It's true of therapy as well. Stick with it. You know, it will make an impression on your mind, but you're battling against a lifetime's worth of habits and damage. And I think if you accept that and forgive yourself for it, because it's not your fault, you can start to see that there will be an end to this process, you know. And so, you know, on a day-to-day basis, I live my life mostly very happily. I get a bit depressed sometimes, and sometimes it's worse than others. But, you know, I work, I'm productive. I live as a free person in society, and you know, none of those things were true 2 years ago. You know, so yeah, I mean, you know, am I in the broad sunlit uplands of total recovery? Well, no, because it doesn't work like that. You know, I don't need it to be like that. You know, I just need one day at a time to be able to do the things I do that make me happy. Be aware of the improvements I can make. And just, you know, live the life that I've been given, you know. And I think those things you start to appreciate very simple blessings in life, and that's really important as well. You know, I'm alive.
One of those blessings, Nick, that you always say is your son. How's everything for him?
Yeah, good. I mean, he's just a blessing unto himself. I'm lucky to have him, and you know, he's great. I mean, I've sort of tried to develop a way around. I used to say, well, he's my reason for living. And, you know, it's not illegitimate when you're really struggling, is to focus on the thing that you love most in this life. So do you really want to leave that, you know, with all the implications that has? But now I'm trying to think, you know, I've got other ways. Well, yeah, I stay in recovery, and I want to live because of my son. There are other reasons too, you know, my own reasons. You know, I'm a talented writer. I've got nice friends who love me. And I want to live for those things too. So you can sort of broaden your horizons a little bit and remember why you were, you know, why you were happy to be alive in the first place before all this stuff started, you know. You know, I used to be a happy guy long before my son came along. So it's not just about him. You know, there's the inherent me, the essential self that you are, is still in there somewhere. The values that you cherish, the friendships that you have, the loyalties and all that kind of stuff, that's all still there somewhere, however tricky things may have been. And I think I'm starting to slowly rediscover those, you know, just to find out again why I used to like myself, or why other people liked me, why I felt myself to be a person of value in society, the things I did that make life worth living, you know, reading a book. I stopped reading books for, I don't know how many, 2 years basically. I'm a voracious reader. So I started to read books again. You know, it's such a simple thing, but if you're in the depths of despair and depression, you don't even know that you're not reading a book. You have no idea. You know, you don't even know where you are, what's coming or going. And so those little things I've started to rediscover. It's one of the reasons I'm on Facebook. I make a big deal out of posting when I go for a coffee. It's just a cafe latte or whatever. People say, why do you keep posting pictures? Because this for me represents a victory. It's just little victories, you know, that going for a coffee beats going for a bottle of wine. That a coffee is a lovely thing into itself. That my mood is always a lot better, I notice, when I'm going to cafes, just generally. I haven't been to a cafe for a while, actually, because I've got a work project and I'm just focusing on that. It's typical me. So, you know, those little reminders, they hold you accountable every day. The reason I'm sat here having a coffee today is because I can. I'm alive. It's pleasurable. And that's why I'm making a record of it, you know. And I think that once you start to re-establish little things like that, little claims in your life, then you will start to make a slow recovery from the mental health problems that beset you. And you get out of your own head. You know, you can sit and people watch and be critical of other people or daydream, you know, instead of sitting in your mental health silo going crazy or desperately trying to avoid a drink. You're actually engaging with the world. You know, taking an Instagram photo of a cappuccino may not seem much, but it is actually a form of communication with the world outside. You know, and if you've been to the sort of depths of despair that people have gone to, and I have, then you know that for me is a win. You know, so.
Well, Nick, Jordan, thank you so much for joining me again. Look forward to coming and putting the world to rights again another time.
Lovely as ever talking to you. Thank you. It's always a great pleasure.
Take
right,
care. Bye-bye.
You too. Thanks, Andrew. Bye.
So thank you again to Nick Jordan for being my very special guest today and putting the world to rights. If you do have any views or have suggestions as to who should be a guest on this show, you can write to me at guests@octopustv.com. That's guests@octopustv.com. Don't forget, you can follow me at Andrew Eborn, at Octopus TV, and subscribe on all of the usual channels. Do it now. But the really important message is this, is that you're not alone. There are people who are there to help. There are people going through similar things from every walk of life. And always, as I say, question everything. The truth is out there. And if we can help guide you on the path towards the truth, then a little job almost done. But for me, for now, thank you very much for joining me. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.